Ladies and gents, welcome to this 2023 edition of the Connoisseur Conversations. My name's Justin Hast, and it's a real pleasure to be here with you today at the show. I'm joined by an esteemed panel of guests and friends, Mr. James Stacey, senior writer at Hodinkee, Mr. Gary Getz, photographer and collector, and Mr. Wilhelm Schmid, CEO of a.lange and Söhne. And today we're going to talk about a fascinating new novelty for this year. And let's dive straight into it. Gary, give us your first take, your initial reaction to seeing the Odysseus Chronograph.
Well, it was kind of interesting. Looked at the watch and said, "Oh, you've made an Odysseus with a black dial." And Herr Schmid said, "Yeah, well, you know, when we make the chronograph, always the first one is black." Oh, oh, the chronograph. I mean, it's so subtle, and of course, you know, I happen to have the original Odysseus day date, and when you saw the pushers on that, you kind of knew that eventually it was going to come. But I'm glad it's here. I guess is the short version. I think it's fantastic looking. The cosmetics are great. We'll talk a lot more about it. But my first impression is, wow, really super watch.
James?
Yeah, I would agree with Gary. I mean, it's an incredibly subtle watch, but it's also one of those ones where the moment you understand even the first 2-3 layers, you're smiling. A real treat. I got to see it in person moments ago, and it also kind of represents something that's not available otherwise from other offerings, even at a very high level. And I think packaged in such a quiet way, it's so lange and so special. It really is just the kind of thing that makes you giggle as a watch fan, for sure.
And Wilhelm, you must be incredibly proud. 2019 was the first time we saw an Odysseus, and so much has come already. Give us a quick take on how long it took to develop this new chronograph.
Look, obviously you're very right, Gary. Everybody was wondering what we do with pushers if it's only a day-date correction. But obviously, an automatic chronograph is nothing you do within 2 or 3 years. So we started developing the movement long before we even launched the Odysseus. That's how much really was on stake. Just imagine the Odysseus wouldn't have worked in the first place. There's a whole bunch of watches and developments that went parallel, and gladly it worked out extremely well. After, I would say, 12 months of controversial discussion, there are always those that like it and those that don't. I'm always interested in those that don't like but love the brand. Trolls I don't care too much about, to be honest, but I'm always curious to understand people that love us, but say it's not for me. For me, almost that's good, because I think it gave the brand an edge that we didn't have before. There is something which you either like or you don't, which is always strong.
But it's almost like when you have a view, you care. Those that had a strong view in 2019, Absolutely. It was lovely to hear that because it showed how much they cared about the brand. And actually, it was just a departure from maybe what they knew. And now in 2023, it feels very much familiar to us all. 71 in-house calibers over the years and 13 chronograph calibers. Just give us an idea of the challenges of developing a new caliber, because of course this watch could have been done awfully more straightforward than doing what you've done.
Well, that's the biggest challenge. If you look at the Lange 1 at Zeitwerker on Odysseus, regardless which sort of complication or case dial combination you look at it and you will immediately identify that as part of this family. That's the recognizable value, which is very strong, but it comes with a complication because it means you have to work around that face. Lange 1, be it a tourbillon perpetual, will always look like a Lange 1. And Odysseus, be it a chronograph, will always look like a day date. Because you have to work around it. Otherwise, there's no consistency in the design language of that particular family. And that probably is the biggest challenge. So you have to start with new iterations even before you launch the first one to have eventually a whole family. So that is probably the biggest challenge for our people. And then if you want to have it in variable dimensions, and with my small wrists, I'm always a good test person. Yeah. And I enjoy that part a lot, I have to admit. Best part of my job. Yeah, sure. But that it comes all together, and that's why it takes time.
But actually, you were lighting up earlier, and I've known you for years now, and it's not often that you wear a watch like you do, and you've lit up and said, I think I need one of these ones. And you need to wear the watch for a bit of time before you appreciate how great it is.
Now, I had that first time in my hands about good 2 months ago, and it was only the movement with the dial, and Tony was activating the push buttons, and I saw that dynamic reset, and I just said, it looks so great. And then I saw it in different faces. Now I think it's just, and I think you pointed it out, it's a very complicated watch, but only for those that know.
Well, I mean, it's kind of I think it's an interesting continuation of the titanium from last year, because titanium is a very quiet, philosophically a very quiet material for a watch. From the distance, maybe you know it from the color, but otherwise, most of its benefits are just for whoever has it on their wrist. And I think with this, even if you knew chronographs really well from across the table, you don't have no idea this is a chronograph.
No.
And I think that's so special. And then when you turn it over, it's just entirely next level for sure.
I mean, if it wasn't enough for people to get their heads around a sports watch from Lange in 2019, consider last year, 2022, with that titanium. It's like, whoa, wow. And this year we've got that very beautiful complication seamlessly integrated. But interestingly, James, here we've got Lange going their own way in many ways, because we've got 100 pieces, one watch, 100 pieces, and that's it for 2023 at the show. It's quite something. I mean, we've got a story there in itself, no? Because of course, at the show here today, we're going to see lots of novelties from lots of different brands. Really quite a big statement from Lange.
I mean, I don't want to speak out of turn here, certainly sitting with some absolute experts on the topic, but Lange is subtlety. It's not a lack of anything. It's just you're buying it for yourself. And I think the ability to come to the biggest fair, the biggest stage with one watch says exactly what you want to say. You put all the effort into the one watch and you made something kind of special, right?
It's a big statement. But it's not really one. I mean, well, it's 100, but it's also the big one. Gary, have you earmarked that big one in the stand for yourself after the show? Is that one that you're going home?
Yeah, well,
talking and taking watches back to the States.
I was just, as you were talking, I was just thinking about the first thing on Monday morning every year for our gang from California is you drop your coat, you get past the gate, and you run down to the corner and look down the hall to see what that big watch is. Yeah. And I mean, that's a tradition, I'm sure not just for us, but for many people. And so, but my wife would love that if I brought all that.
Believe me, I've not brought a wall clock from Lange back, but I've bought other wall clocks and it's not gone down well. But give us an idea, how long does it take to actually create that clock, and where do they go afterwards? Because that is a question that's on the lips of most people.
It takes almost 6 months, 7 months to build it. Mm-hmm. By now, the first one took longer because it's always the same little specialist team that will bring it together. In the past, they were actually scrapped after that. Today, we reuse them in a boutique. So if a boutique is big enough to cater for it, we'll bring it there, and trust me, it's amazing. It just draws people attention to something which usually is very small. And if it's very big, or when it's very big, it's proportional. So it's all fine. It's just gigantic. It's very nice in a window, I have to say. We did it in Berlin during COVID times, and you have no idea how many people actually were drawn into the showroom simply by that giant watch. So today we really reuse them, and I don't know where this watch will go. I have a good idea, but I can't disclose now.
I dare to say you might spend more time making that watch than some brands spend making their novelties. But that's a side note. That's a side note. No. Not at all. Let's talk about the design, because it's a black dial. It's a really interesting complication. Did you always know it was going to be a black dial, or did you in-house decide that, looking at the various options, that actually black dial, red chronograph hand was where we were going to go?
I said it to Gary before. Funny enough, all our chronographs were first launched with a black dial. So it's quite a tradition to start with a black dial. Straight from the beginning, dactograph in 99 or double split, they all came first iteration black dial. So that's why we chose a black dial here on this one as well, because that's a logical addition to all the chronograph movements that we launched in the past. There are many novelties, but how many new automatic chronographs are launched in a normal year? I would say zero. Probably if you take a period of time of 5 years, there's maybe one. Often there is none. So it's, people underestimate the complexity of a chronograph, and specifically of an automated chronograph, I think.
Oh, it's one of the hardest things to do. That's why so few people do it.
There's a reason.
There's a reason why there are classic
Yes.
chronograph, calibers that are reused by so many people. It's very hard.
Yeah. And again, we love chronographs. And if I ask our watchmaker, because unfairly or fairly, depending how you see it, people say there are 3 big complications, which is the perpetual calendar, tourbillon, and everything with acoustic. And I totally agree with everything on acoustic. Minute repeater, grand sonnerie, that's a very, very own playground, which is very, very difficult. I totally agree. Perpetual calendar is difficult, but it's not very dynamic, because anything happens usually between 10 and 12, and some watches at 12, but that's what it happens. That's all it does. And a tourbillon is fascinating because there's a lot of little parts that have to work. If I ask my watchmaker what is easier to assemble, chronograph or perpetual or tourbillon, there's a very clear winner here, which is more difficult, and that's the chronograph.
And there's one thing about delivering a chronograph, there's another delivering it in such a seamless, elegant design. Give us an overview, Gary, maybe of the technical elements, because this is not just your average chronograph as well.
Well, I'll maybe take half a step back from that. To me, the number one thing that I look for in a watch is coherence, right? And you've spoken to it already in our discussion here, that it has to be a lange, it has to look like a lange, it has to look like an Odysseus, that there's a family resemblance that, as you often say, you could take the name off the dial and it would immediately be obvious, the maker, and in this case, the family. And then behind that, that it's an automatic. Right, from Lange, we're used to looking at the back and seeing the city under glass, but not a rotor, so that's a wonderful addition. And then the whole dynamic return mechanism is just it's so much fun to watch.
That's right,
and almost impossible to do, I'm sure. So that again, I think it just it's layer upon layer upon layer, and as you said, right, you wouldn't really know at first glance. I certainly didn't. Say, oh, that's a chronograph, really, and then you see it work.
James, another really interesting point here is that there really isn't another super high-end automatic chronograph with an integrated steel bracelet on the market.
Yeah, I mean it's a very slim market if there is another that I'm somehow failing to think of. But at this level of integration with the bracelet, with everything else that we've already mentioned, and to have a beautifully hand-finished automatic movement is a rarity in the market. And I think that chronograph guys, whether they're Lange or otherwise, will recognize that very quickly.
I love chronographs, I have to say. It's my perfect. If I had to boil down my whole collection to one watch, so far it was the datograph up and down. It just got a competitor.
What does the Odysseus mean to the collector community now, Gary, after these years of development in such a short period of time?
For years it was, Lange will never make a steel watch. Lange, the very few steel case Lange ones aside, but we'll never make a steel watch. We'll never make a sport watch. And yet, by the time your timing was great, because of all there were people who said it's not to my taste or it is to my taste.
Fine.
But I didn't hear anyone say, it's heretical for Lange to have a sport watch or to have a bracelet watch. That how dare they? That time had passed already. So I think the launching of Odysseus as a family was anticipated to some extent and welcomed and timely for the collector community. And then the question, of course, was always, well, what next? And now we know.
Answered.
Answered it. But I have to say, I wouldn't have expected that the day-date architecture would have been fully retained. I would have expected the case and maybe the bracelet and the pushers, but I'm pleasantly surprised. Well, chronography, they're going to be sub-registers on the dial, and it'll look like a datograph. Initially, people said, well, they've got to make a chronograph. And then people started doing mock-ups, and basically they all looked like a datograph in an Odysseus case. And it's like, well, now we already have a datograph.
Yeah.
There already is such a thing, so it has to be different than that. And I think it's a big success from that perspective.
Very few will know what it's like to own one and to wear one. You do own one.
The original.
You're the original.
Yeah.
Give us an overview of what it's like to wear on a daily basis.
It's a super wearing watch. The adjustable bracelet is such a joy. And even if I don't have to fiddle with it, I'll push the button and I'll click it, and I'll push the button and I'll click it, and it's like, gee, I wonder if my wrist got just a little bit bigger in the past half hour. Maybe I need to play with that bracelet.
I saw that little click, 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 click. It just feels good, huh?
It feels good. Well, with a Lange watch, if you ask people what's the greatest winding watch in the world, Datograph is often cited as the best feeling winding watch in the world, and Lange pays attention to the haptics and how we have our good friend. You hand him a watch, he closes his eyes and he winds it, and then he'll work the pushers if it's a chronograph. Before he even looks at the watch, the first thing he does, that's his big criteria. And I think, again, as a wearing watch, the Odysseus, it's so comfortable on the wrist, it's so adjustable, and I have to confess that the first time I did it with the little, the pusher and taking the links out, and my wrist doesn't change that much in size that I needed to take the thing apart and put it together 20 times. But that's also very cool, very cool. And you can in fact do this at home and not worry about scratching it up or anything. So it's just thoughtful. It's thoughtful. Talking
of those little moments that you have with a watch that you enjoy, that you don't normally publicly advertise as something that you get joy from, but me, the big date function on a Lange 1, that is just one of the best things in watchmaking, full stop. Such joy. James, I remember when I was at Hodinkee, I was never in the office, but whenever there was an opportunity to write about Lange, people jumped at it because it was one of the easier tasks.
Well, you're in competition with Ben anytime the brand comes out. So. Yeah.
Do you remember the introduction back in 2019? Do you remember the response? And did you expect the chronograph to come so soon?
Absolutely not. I thought the chronograph would take more time, but of course you said that you guys started the movement before 2019, so I suppose that makes sense. I definitely remember this response being, when you speak to a big audience, you're speaking to a wide level of understanding, and like Lange is not a brand that you just kind of walk up to and understand. It takes time. It's a more complicated sort of presence. And I think we had the whole range of people going like, I don't really get this watch. I like the one from last year. I only like the Lange 1, whatever it is, to people going like, this is everything I've wanted from this brand, the everyday watch that will be incredibly comfortable because of the integrated bracelet, the presence of something in steel, and then the fact that there is some physical connection to the watch by having the pushers used to do something where other watches you might need a little tool or something like that. And it's just it's sort of a more singular expression of an idea that I think not everybody was ready for.
Because you've got such a broad understanding of what's going on the market, give us an idea of how Lange fits in, and specifically the Odysseus, into watches more broadly, especially the last couple of years we've had where interest levels have gone through the roof, and it's been this amazing ride.
Yeah, I mean, just like Gary said, I think you couldn't have been better timed in terms of coming to the market with a steel watch.
Now that's obvious, and maybe it's
always obvious.
Not so much. Yeah.
Hindsight.
but even in 2018, I think it might have felt months early. You know what I mean? Like it was perfectly placed when it showed up. And to have a steel option for not only for a younger audience, but also just for an audience that remains active longer through their life now, right? And would like something with proper water resistance. Thank you so much. You just made a chronograph with more than 500 components in the movement and has 120 meters of water resistance. I think that's wonderful. Other brands would have 5, right? And as a dive watch nerd, I love this kind of stuff. I think it really speaks to the level of commitment to the complete form of the watch rather than just the movement or just the bracelet or something like that. It, like Gary said, a very thoughtful approach to the watch. And then I think for the collector community, it gave Lange fans or people who maybe didn't realize they were yet to be Lange collectors a new avenue. And that's everything that you can provide is a new way for somebody to go deeper into the specific way that you do something if you're a brand. and giving people a sort of ladder in. Maybe they start at a Saxonia, maybe they start somewhere else, or maybe they're lucky enough to start with an Odysseus. But it's a wonderful entry point to the brand or accent to an existing collection. So I don't know that you can fault the plan or the timing.
It's a lange you could wear every day.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anywhere, right? You
I mean,
can wear it in the water, you can wear it to the gym, you can wear it. You can always be wearing your lange watch.
Yeah. And if you talk to lange guys and gals, like the cool thing is, regardless of what you guys are able to pack inside of the case, it'll work. You could wear pretty much any lange every day, right? But you go a step further with something like an Odysseus.
Yeah.
I think that's where it appeals to a sports watch guy like myself.
We were talking, Gary, just before we started filming about your trip to Fiji. Please tell me you took the Odysseus diving in Fiji.
I'm sorry to reveal. No, I did.
Sounds like we need to plan a dive trip.
There we go. I think that's a lovely.
So the Connoisseur Conversation 2024 is going to be Mr. Schmidt,
Yeah.
James,
Wetsuits.
Gary, and I. We're all going to be in the Cook Islands.
shorts.
There we
We're
go,
gonna be in the Cook
yeah.
Islands, and it's going to be board shorts.
Wetsuits, messy hair.
There we go.
Sponsored by Lange. What a statement around the pool with the Odysseus on. Willem, the interesting point, there are two interesting points. Number one, the average age maybe of a Lange customer coming down, and also the fact there's only 100 of these watches.
Yeah.
Now, that's a blessing and a curse. Maybe give us an idea of how you're approaching that now.
I think the worst is if you produce a watch that nobody wants. Let's be very clear, that's the real nightmare. The other is a challenge, you have to deal with it, which I understand. We speak mostly to real watch lovers, people that understand what they buy if they come to us. And they will understand that all the chronographs that we today have in collection are waiting list watches. So you can't just go and buy a datograph or an 1815 chronograph. This is another chronograph. It's assembled by the same group of watchmaker that are doing the other watches which we can't supply. So it wouldn't make any sense to come up with an unlimited number of watches and then have waiting lists or waiting times for 6, 7, 8 or even longer. That's not our business model. That's why we said we do 100. That should be doable within the next couple of years, and then we see what we do next.
You're also going to tell us today about what's to come for the Odysseus in years down the line. So give us an overview. We've got the chronograph. We've got the chronograph
Very
here
nice
today,
try.
2023. Next
Very
year
nice
we've got
try.
what have we got coming?
Very, very nice try.
Do tell. Yeah.
Because it's a wonderful format to build on. I mean, it really is, like, objectively.
But we, last year we came with the new Zeitwerk. We always play each family. There's a rhythm, and if you go back, you will see the rhythm. By the way, we only come with one real new watch, but we'll bring the novelties that we launched in the last 3 years to Watches and Wonders, and even I have not seen them in one place in my life. And we tend to forget that last year Asia wasn't here, and a lot of people didn't show up. The 2 years before, it was purely digital. So trust me, it's not just the one watch.
That's good news.
It will actually illustrate why we struggled so much, because if a small company is launching so many new watches like we did in the last 3 years, even for people that do not understand a manufacturer totally, they will understand the complexity and the challenge we put into that operation by bringing so much novelties. And that's the reason why there's only one watch. First of all, it took a lot of effort, trust me, and it deserves to be on its own. It would anyhow steal the limelight from any other thing. So that's why that's the monolith in the middle, and it'll be in the middle, Gary. It is in the middle, and all the other watches will be around it.
That's great news, because James and I were wanting to see that minute repeater, Richard Lange.
Oh, yeah, it's
the
stunning.
enamel dial
Yeah.
again, and put our names down for that one from last year.
Yeah, good luck.
If you haven't already.
But I actually think, from the media perspective, it's actually genius, because ultimately you go in and you come out with one watch in your mind anyway. You go into most brand shows, presentations, and there is that one watch that you remember, and typically it's the one watch that you write about and share. So I think it's genius, and actually it shows you becoming even more of what you are in your essence, I think, which is really interesting.
It's as I said, if you struggle with the delivery of watches, novelty is a natural way of reducing your output further. So you have to be a bit careful with that. And again, we've never had an automatic chronograph before. So this is really a milestone in the history of the company. And again, what people need to understand is that movement can only be used in the Odysseus family. So it's not like a standard chronograph movement that now you work in this family and in this family and you put a bit on top and you use it in this family. This movement can only be used at the Odysseus. That's an additional complexity or complication on top of all the other stuff.
Gents, on that note, thank you very much for your time. Enjoy the rest of the week, and always an absolute pleasure. We'll see you next year in Fiji.
Good. Why not?
Yeah, done.